Elevate Me is brought to you by Scotiabank, the Spring Mill Distillery, and Wellington Motors.
All right, I think we are live. Elevate Me with, hold on guys. Sorry guys, we're having technical issues again, but looks like we are on. Mike, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Great. Well, before we start anything, I think we want to introduce our
special guest.
Our special guest today. So let me just show you guys a little something here. 1 second.
Elevate Me is brought to you by Scotiabank, the Spring Mill Distillery, and Wellington Motors.
Yay! Vicki!
Welcome.
Thanks so much for being here. Can you hear us okay?
I can hear you just fine. Can you hear me?
We can hear you just great. First of all, I want to kind of share a little bit of how I got to know you. So I was lucky enough to work on your video for Canada's Sports Hall of Fame. And I have to say, I've interviewed tons of people for a lot of these inductee videos. I've had the privilege of meeting a lot of different athletes, and there was just something about you and your story that is so incredibly special. And I think people need to know who you are. And so when we were talking about who we wanted to bring on the show and who we wanted to talk to, you were like on top of my list. I'm like, everybody needs to hear Vicki Keith.
Wow, thank you.
I think the cool thing about you, I mean, there's a lot of different things, but I want to first start with the fact that you weren't necessarily the best athlete growing up.
No, I think that's saying it really. I had the heart of a dancer, but everything that I tried fell apart. I didn't have the coordination to be able to do some of the things I wanted to do, but I had this in me, which was you can achieve anything you want to. And I believed that completely. And so even when everything was falling down, my thought process was, well, then I have to find what I can do.
So I think what's really interesting is you talked about how, I mean, marathon swimming isn't like, it's not like hockey or soccer or tennis that is like there, you see it all the time. How the heck did that even enter? Like, tell us that story.
Well, I searched for a long time for a sport where I would excel in, and I'd never heard of marathon swimming. I'd never heard of Marilyn Bell. I didn't know anything about the sport. I did know swimming. I love to swim. I did know about cross-country running and long-distance running. But my brain put something together one night in the middle of the night, and it took two sports that I loved, competitive swimming and long-distance running, and put them together. And I woke up at 2:00 in the morning knowing that I was going to be a long-distance swimmer. And I opened my Guinness Book of World Records and I turned past the competitive swimming records, and there was a whole bunch of open water swimming records. And that was the first time that I realized that there was a sport that maybe I had been created for. And so I was very excited at that moment. I ended up reading the Guinness Book of World Records over and over again all night long and going to school that day and telling my friends, someday I'm going to be a great marathon swimmer. Now, of course, at that point I started to procrastinate because I'm also a skilled procrastinator.
So you basically had a dream. In the night, your dream was that you wanted to get hypothermia, swim with sharks, and vomit while you swim. So up until that time, what was the longest distance you had ever swam?
Longest distance probably was swimathon. With Swim Ontario runs a swimathon every year for competitive swimmers, and it was 200 lengths or 2 hours, whichever came first. And I'd swum it a number of times. I'd done it butterfly because why not? But that's the longest. And I'd swum in lakes, but I'd never done any open water swimming. And I certainly never swum at night.
So I love this idea of you just woke up in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
Like that. Yeah. That's crazy.
It was my brain putting things together. And I think that's one of the reasons we sleep, is because our brain does a lot of problem solving while we sleep. And I wanted something so intensely, and I wanted to find my purpose in life. And I knew that there had to be a reason that I was on earth, and I couldn't figure out what it was. And I think that I'd been dealing with that for a long period of time, and it came together at that moment.
How old were you, Vicki, when you had that happen?
I was maybe 15 years old. So I was mid-teens and just needed something more.
And when did you, so you said you procrastinated, because I know when I talked to you last time, you were like, I got this idea. Did you wake up and later and think, oh my God, that's just crazy? Like, what was I thinking?
Oh, I didn't go back to sleep at that moment. I stayed awake all night long. I opened up my Guinness book. I went over it over and over and over again, psyching myself up for it, preparing myself for it, confirming in my brain that this was it. So there was no question on whether it was, but I got up in the morning having not gone back to sleep, knowing that that's what I was going to do.
And how long until because you said you procrastinated, how long until you started implementing something in place to kind of do this?
Years. I think I was 23 when I actually took the first step. And what happened was, I talked about it a lot. I talked about what I was going to do. And somebody came up to me one day and they said the one thing I needed to hear more than anything else. They said, Vicki, shut up and do it. And I looked at him and I said, what are you talking about? He says, I've heard you talking about this for an incredibly long time. It's time for you to shut up, stop talking about it, get in the water, get busy and do it. I said, okay, I'll do it next year. And he said, no, do it now. And within 3 months, I'd set 2 world records. So I'd been training that whole time. I'd been talking about it that whole time, but I didn't know how to take that first step. And I think that that's one of the things that we struggle with more than anything else, is how do we take that first step? And having that just one person believe in me enough to say, get busy, I started to make the plans. The night before my first swim, which was 12 miles butterfly, 7 o'clock at night, I still didn't have a boat to go along beside me. And one of the young people on the swim team that I coached at the time, who was known as sort of a goofy kid, called me at 7 o'clock at night and said, are you still looking for a boat? And I'm going, I don't have time to talk to you right now. He's still looking for a boat. He says, we have one. And so at 7 o'clock at night, we got the boat we needed. And that's when I realized I was going to be able to get in the water the next morning and start the swim.
And what was what were the 2 world records that you set? Those first 2.
So the first one was 12 miles butterfly. The male world record was 10 miles butterfly. So I set the record at 12. I started to swim it. During the swim, we found out days before internet that they had just recently set the record and brought it higher. So it was only a female world record, not an overall world record. And then the second swim I did a couple of months later was 100 hours continuously in a pool.
How do you train for that? What do you how do you actually train for that?
So there's a number of aspects. One is the mental aspect, and it's something that we're not using enough in sport. We think that the physical training is the most important thing that we do, but what we truly need is that mental training. So just believing that it was possible was the most important thing, especially with nobody believing it was possible and everybody proving that it's not because it's never been done. And people's perception that if it hasn't been done, it can't be done. So you have to overcome all of that. And so I was a lifeguard and a swimming instructor and a swim coach at the time. And I would sit in the lifeguard chair counting the people in the pool, every time looking at each person going, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And I said that hour after hour till there was nothing in my brain but the understanding that it was possible. And we have this voice in our head that tells us all the reasons things can't be done. I just had to outweigh that voice. And I intuitively understood that with the positive. I had to believe it was possible. And so that was the first part of the training. No, go ahead.
No, is that something that you had as a child, like that determination to once you set your mind on something to do it? Or is that something that you developed later on?
I was known as the stubborn child. And what I've learned is that's the term that people use when they don't understand your goal. And you become a determined person once your goal becomes understood. So it's the same thing. So I still consider myself. So I think that I always had that stubbornness inside me, but it was a process to develop the skills to outweigh the voice in the head, because we all have that voice. We all have that negative side to us. And it was a skill that I started then and perfected throughout my swimming career. Because when you're absolutely and completely miserable, and I remember in the attempt at the double crossing of Lake Ontario, I actually turned to my crew members and said, you know, it's really strange. I'm swimming in fresh water, but my goggles are filling up with salt water. And only one person understood. My mother understood what I was saying, and nobody else got it. But I was crying and so frustrated at that moment in time that my goggles were half full of tears. And you have to be able to fight through that and find that positive voice in the really negative situations, the challenging situations. And so at that point, I turned to my crew and I said, that's it, I'm turning my brain off. And my mother panicked, going like she didn't understood what that meant, but I couldn't fight any longer, and I couldn't give up on my dream. So I shut my brain down. I put a tune in my head, and for 2 hours, there was nothing in my brain but one line of one song. And I don't remember what that song was, and it didn't matter what it was. It was to shut everything else up. 2 hours later, I had fought through some of the currents. I started to make progress, and I was actually on schedule at that point to break the record on the speed for that direction of the crossing, which because of the currents I didn't. But when I got to shore, nobody believed that I was going to turn around and come back, because that was halfway through, and I still had to swim back across Lake Ontario. And so they came to me thinking I was done. And somebody brought me my Big Mac because, sorry, that's all I craved the whole swim was a hamburger. They brought me my Big Mac, and I started to eat it. Well, I stood knee deep in the water, turned around, started to swim back while I finished my burger, and turned around and continued on my way back across Lake Ontario. 56 hours and 10 minutes later, that swim was completed.
That's insane. Hasn't anyone ever told you not to eat before going swimming? Hadn't you heard that before?
Okay, this is true if you're eating Thanksgiving dinner and you have this huge meal. If you're going to be in the water for 2 or 3 days, you require fuel.
So
agreed, I'll take it.
You were saying that, how does it even come about that you're going to actually swim the Great Lakes? How does that, I know you were talking with friends, how does that even,
and it was a joke.
Even understand. Yeah, it was a joke.
It was a joke. I just completed the double crossing of Lake Ontario, and a group of my friends were trying to come up with the most ridiculous suggestion for the next goal. And they sat there and they came up with the most impossible thing they could imagine, which was all 5 Great Lakes in one summer. And they came to me laughing because they thought they'd come up with something that would beat me. And I went out the next day and I bought a map of the Great Lakes. I nailed it to my living room wall. I took a magic marker and drew a line across each one of the Great Lakes. and stood back and looked at it, and I said, I can do this. And then I started to create a montage on that wall. So I had newspaper clippings around the outside, inspirational quotes, pictures of things that inspired me. And it just became this huge montage on my wall. And every day when I woke up in the morning, I would stop and I'd look at the map and tell myself that I could do it. And every night before I went to bed, and every time I walked past my living room, I'd stop and I'd look at the map and tell myself that I could do it. And I actually talked myself into believing it was possible when all the experts were saying it can't be done. You cannot swim across Lake Superior, it's too cold. You cannot swim across Lake Michigan, it's too far. And you cannot do 5 ultra marathons in 2 months. It's not possible. And so all I did was break the goal into smaller and smaller steps until it was achievable.
And a lot of what you do, and it's, I don't even know if you knew you were doing it, but you had a vision board. You were visualizing. You were doing everything that we would call it that, but you were just doing it intuitively.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't even believe in visualization per se. I do believe in mental imagery. I don't see things. If I close my eyes, I don't visualize, as some people will. But I do use mental imagery. And what I do is I use how I feel as the ultimate goal. So if I'm in the middle of Lake Ontario, I'm not visualizing the end. I'm imagining how it's going to feel the first time my hand touches stone at the bottom of the lake, the first time my foot touches, walking through, feeling the pressure of the water on my knees as I move towards shore, my first step on land, the voices of people around me. But I can add some vision into it, but overall it's an emotional thing, is how is it to make me feel? Because truly it doesn't matter what it looks. It doesn't matter what it sounds like. It doesn't matter what it smells like. It matters how it feels to you. And that's what's going to inspire you to continue.
What was the hardest? So, okay, first I want to say, what do you tell your parents when you think you want a marathon swim, and how do parents respond to that?
So my parents were incredibly supportive, but I don't think they fully understood what I wanted to do. And I was a little fearful of the response that I would get from them, because there was no logical response they could give me. And so what I did is I waited till they were in Winnipeg, visiting my grandmother, and I called them the night before and I said, by the way, I wanted to let you know I'm going to set a world record tomorrow. And my mother's going, oh my goodness, we have to go home. We have to help her. And my dad's going, we've got to let her do this. So they completely understood, but they didn't really understand, if that makes sense at all. And I think the thing that touched me the most in all of that is my mom did an interview one time, and the media person asked her, do you think Vicki can do this? I couldn't fathom how it was possible, but she couldn't say no. And so her response was, she thinks she can. And what she meant by that was, I believe in my daughter because my daughter believes in herself.
It's that power of belief, I think, that, I've read so many books on this, and you captured that, you got that, I call it magic. It's that magic of believing. And there's a book called that, actually, but it's that magic of believing. And if there's anything that I feel I get from your story is that power of belief.
And even more important than having the power of belief is being able to share that with other people. One of the things that I do that I'm very passionate about is I coach a team of physical impairments in Kingston, Ontario, the Kingston Y Penguins. And my goal isn't to teach them how to swim. My goal is to teach them to believe in themselves. And through swimming, that's one of the ways we do it. But we have set some outrageously huge goals that teach people that anything is possible. I think about some of the athletes that I've coached. Ashley Cowan, a quadruple amputee who swam across Lake Erie. Carlos Costa, a double leg amputee who swam across Lake Ontario. Terry Lynn Langdon, an athlete with CP who swam across Lake Erie, Jenna Lambert swam across Lake Ontario. None of this should have been possible, but once somebody believes that something is possible and they've taken one step towards it, there's no stopping them.
Yeah, it's funny because I always say, I grew up in an era where a lot of coaching were hard coaching, like hard, critical. And I think the best coach I ever had was a coach that believed in me. And when somebody believed in me, I would have gone to the ends of the earth to prove them right almost. It was like, oh my God, they believe that I can do this. They think that I'm good enough to do this. And it's interesting that you say that, because I think a lot of success comes from lifting. And we named this Elevate because I think it is about elevating people. And when you give them that belief, that giving somebody belief allows them to grow into that belief.
Absolutely.
Gives them permission.
And it doesn't matter if the goal that you start with that belief is the goal that you end with that belief. It's our responsibility to give the belief to the young people we work with. And it doesn't matter if I'm a swim coach and they end up achieving something in math. I'm not a math person. That's why I chose it. It doesn't matter where they ultimately go. They need somebody to believe in them along the way so that they can achieve what's important in their lives. And in my opinion, is one of the tools that we use to help our athletes. And sport is one of the tools we help our athletes achieve great things in the world. And it's not about swimming or running or whatever our sport is. It's about what can we give our young people so that they can take the next step in our world.
Now, as you're planning for these swims and you're visualizing, not visualizing per se, but you're getting your mind right. Are you removing any kind of doubt or fear, or is there still that kind of, it's going to hurt, it's going to be tough. You're determined to do it, but how is the rest? How does the rest, the reality of the action setting in?
I would block out any of the negative aspects of it. And the more challenging the swim was going to be, the more intensely I would block the negative out. I think about the Catalina Channel. When I swam Catalina Channel butterfly, I attempted it, and 2/3 of the way across, we ended up in shipping lane, and there was a number of sharks around, and the crew of the boat said, "You need to get out of the water." And I was in an emotionally weak moment right then, and I agreed immediately without asking any questions. I got out of the water and knew instantaneously it was an error, but I got onto the boat, and I sat there in shock and in tears. And when I went to bed that night, I believed that everything I had achieved up until that moment had been a fluke. The Great Lakes, the double crossing Lake Ontario, the 129-hour swim, all of that had been a fluke, and that I wasn't an open water swimmer, that I had no talent at all. And I woke up in the morning thinking, I've been telling people for years that nothing is impossible. How do I go out and talk to the media right now and admit to them that things are impossible? And I couldn't do it. So I said, if I can't do this, then I have to look at the next swim, the Juan de Fuca, and I have to completely focus on that. And at that moment in time, I had to block everybody out. There was a number of people around that didn't believe it was possible because of the temperature. And I actually became too forceful in some respects and a little bit rude, which I regret now, but it was the only way I could handle it at that moment in time, at that young age, to block everything out that was negative so that I could be successful. And in 2 weeks, I went from the emotional lowest point that I'd been to at that point, to walking into the Juan de Fuca. Water temperature ranged between 7 and 10 degrees Celsius, life expectancy an hour and a half. And I was swimming at butterfly. I'd never been done butterfly. And an hour and a half into the swim, my hands had gone into claws because I couldn't hold them flat anymore because of the cold. And I realized that I had to keep pushing, and I started pulling with my arms instead of my hands. 14 hours of swimming, I climbed out on the other side and became the first person to swim the Juan de Fuca butterfly. But it was the whole journey that mattered to me. and not just that I swam the Juan de Fuca. And at that point, I realized, of course, also that maybe it wasn't a fluke.
Just that point, eh? I think what's interesting too is you didn't just swim, you swam butterfly. Like, what was that? You took it even, you never just took it. No, I'm not going to say it's easy because none of what you did was easy, but you even went further by making it the hardest type of swim you could do.
So when I finished the Great Lakes summer, somebody said, "What's next?" And I didn't know. And shortly after that, I heard it's impossible to swim the English Channel butterfly. And the reason they said it was impossible was because 3 men had already tried it. 2 men had got 1 mile. The other guy got 2 miles. And I struggled with that word impossible. And so I thought, well, what I could do is choose all the major marathon challenges of the world and do them all butterfly. So that summer, I attempted the Cook Strait. I wasn't successful, but it wasn't my fault. The boats broke down. They had to pull me out. So I attempted the Cook Strait. I swam a circumnavigation of Sydney Harbor, the Catalina Channel, the Juan de Fuca, Lake Winnipeg, Lake Ontario. Did I say the English Channel there? The English Channel, all butterfly. So it was choose the challenge and prove a point, I guess. And the point was nothing is impossible.
I love it. Now, walk us through, I mean, I can't imagine. I go to the cottage and I'm trying to figure out how to get from the dock to the raft, which is like, it's probably like 5 meters. So tell us, like, what is it like to swim that much and that hard? Like what physically happens to your body? What do you have to fight through?
So, let me walk you through one of the final swims I did, which was 80 kilometers butterfly. And I actually had to attempt it twice. The first time I got in the water, we had huge winds. Around midnight, I was still swimming butterfly. We had 3-meter swells with a chop on top. And the waves were throwing me around. I remember one time actually being thrown underwater, vomiting underwater because I was very seasick, not knowing where my next breath of air was going to come because I didn't know which way was up. It was pitch dark. Around about 3 o'clock in the morning, I called my crew members. I talked to my husband. I said, I need to know what's happening. I need to be able to make a decision on this. And he said that the forecast isn't great. And they gave me some feedback. And I said, okay, so I'm going to keep going till sunrise and then make a decision. And at sunrise, I made the decision to get out. But one of the things I know, and I've learned through this process, is never make a life-altering decision when you're at your emotional lowest. And so at 3 o'clock in the morning, when everything was going wrong, was not the time to make that decision. So I swam till sunrise. I started to feel better. We always feel better at sunrise. At that moment in time, I made the decision to get out of the water. I had 5 minutes left before I could be pulled out because they had to get the boats together and get everything ready for me to get out of the water. And in that 5 minutes, fix this. How do I make this better? And they've got video, and I haven't seen it for a long time. I don't know if it still exists. But as they came up to me, there was a camera in the boat, and I look at the camera and I say, I've got a solution. And in that 5 minutes, I come up with, how can I fix this? So I got to land, and the CEO of the YMCA, who had been raising the money for, I said that without talking to him first, and I told them I was going to do it again in a week's time, and you could just see his eyes going, holy crap, she's crazy. And a week later, I had changed the route so that I was on a safer route. I didn't have the waves that out in the middle of the lake. I was still in Lake Ontario, so we still had huge waves, but we weren't going across the lake, so the boats and the crew were safer. And I started to swim. We had flat water for the first 12 hours. Then I got stuck in a current for 4 hours and never moved forward. I'm all day, all night, crazy. All the next day. The second night in the water, I needed some sleep. And so what I did was I continued my arm motion, but I was asleep as well. And so I wasn't moving forward. I actually stayed in one spot for 2 or 3 hours with my arms going forward, but my brain resting. And as the sun rose the third morning in Lake Ontario, I was able to, I had gathered enough strength that I could continue forward. So I went across a channel at that point, and I was hallucinating significantly. And one of the rules I have is I know I'm going to hallucinate. That's a normal part of open water swimming. If you've been awake for over 36 hours, your body will take the dream state it requires. So I was hallucinating little things in the bottom, and I have this rule. If I go down to look at one of them, my crew is welcome to pull me out, and I will not hassle them about it, because obviously I've gone over the line. So I know I can look, but I can't touch. And I'm looking at gold doubloons on the bottom going, don't touch it. But what if it's real? No, it can't be real. So I continued to swim all that third day. My goal was to be out of the water originally in 48 hours, but that had passed. I decided that if I could get out before sunset, that would be my next goal. That passed. At 11 o'clock at night, my husband called out to me, touch the rock, Vicki, touch the rock, you've gone the distance. And I remember stopping going, how do you know? How do you know? And he said, touch the rock, we've done the math, you've covered the distance. And I swam over, and anybody that knows butterfly knows you do a two-hand touch. I swam in like this deep water up, touched the rock with two hands, curled up in a ball right there, and started to cry. I don't know where I would have found the strength to take one more stroke. I know that I would have if I needed to, but I had used every last ounce of physical, mental, emotional energy in that swim. And I remember my husband helping me into the Zodiac, because across the bay was a group of people waiting for me to touch. And I remember being curled up in a ball, crying in the bow of the boat, and then just thinking, going, okay. And I looked at my husband, I looked at the person driving the boat, I said, this is how it's going to be. When I get to shore, I'm going to get out of the Zodiac by myself. If I need help, John, you can be standing there so I can put my hand on your shoulder so I have support. And I laid it all out in what I wanted it to look like. And it's the most excruciating, most wonderful experience to go through something like that. There's moments of intense pain, mentally, physically. And why would you do it for 3 days? To touch land, but that feeling of setting that goal and working towards it and achieving it outweighs almost anything else in this world.
How do you train? How do you train yourself? I know we talked a lot prior to this about those hallucinations, and it is common, like you say, it's very common. I didn't know that, but apparently it's very common to have hallucinations when you're longer than a certain period of time. But you actually had to train your brain to not go after them. How do you train yourself to not go after hallucinations, or to know that they're not real?
Well, I had the advantage of the first pool swims that I'd done, the 100 hours continuously and 129 hours and 45 minutes. So I understood from there that I was going to hallucinate, what they were going to be like, that I had control over what I hallucinated, because you don't want to be hallucinating sharks when you're in open water. Because that'll just add to the stress of the whole experience. And so it's one of those things where you just have to train yourself to have a voice above everything else. And I think it's the same thing that I used for butterfly, is the risk of taking one stroke freestyle is too intense. If you take one stroke freestyle in your butterfly swim, the swim is done. It will not count. You have to do every single stroke of legal butterfly. And so what I did the whole year before I swam butterfly was swim only butterfly. There was not one stroke of freestyle done in the 365 days before I got into the water to do my butterfly swims, because I could not take that risk. And it's the same thing with hallucinations or any mental thing. You have to have that voice, that level, and then you have to guide yourself to stick with that no matter what. And so when I was training, sometimes you like in the water, you imagine things, right? You see a flash of light or anything like that, or a fish goes underneath you, and you have to be able to bring yourself to reality, stay in reality no matter what, and be able to identify between reality and fantasy. And that gets, the longer you're in, the harder it is. If you see a flash of light and you look and you realize it was a mirror, that's reality. But when you're 3 days in, you see that flash of light, and all of a sudden it could be anything your imagination made it into. You have to be able to take it back to the mirror level. There's nothing fancy there. Just keep going. You have one job. You have one goal. That's the only thing that matters. The gold doubloons do not matter. Nothing matters but touching the wall at the end.
And now, I mean, I think I could block out pain and block out the naysayers. How do you block out sharks? How does that happen?
Well, it is challenging. I have had a couple of experiences with sharks. The first one was in training, and it was just a little sand shark about this big, and that's not really scary, but it is, because it's those eyes and the shape of the nose, and you just see it, and it's terrifying. When I was doing the Catalina Channel, I was swimming butterfly and had a shark go underneath me, close enough that I could have touched it. I didn't, but it was close enough that I could touch it. And I remember swimming fly and thinking, I can't stop because I'm going to attract more attention. So I kept on swimming fly, and when my mouth came out for a breath, I yelled, "Get the light over here." And by the time they got the light over there, the shark had left. So I figured, why get out? The shark's gone.
What would you say your hardest, most challenging swim was?
I think a combination of the Juan de Fuca, because of the water temperature, and the 80 kilometers butterfly, the 3.5 days of continuous swimming, and a 24-hour period before that of a swim, because a week before I'd done 24 hours butterfly, and the mental challenges and my age. I think it was 19. No, it was, I don't know. I was in my mid to late 40s when I swam my last world record. So, when you're 20, that's one thing, but mid 40s, that's very different.
Crazy.
Now, 3 days of continuous swimming. You get to the other side. Do you just get out of the water to your car? Do you have to be carried? What's the recovery like after pushing your body to those limits?
So the 80 kilometer butterfly swim, I got to shore. I chatted with my friends and my crew members, the penguins. I walked up a very steep hill. The ambulance people the paramedics checked me over. Somebody had a pizza for me. I had a pizza, went to a hotel, got 3 hours sleep, and I showed up at the radio station for the interviews in the morning. Now the funny part was the people had been on the swim didn't show up to work because they were tired. But it was that day we went home after the interviews, and that night was fire training. I was a volunteer firefighter, and I knew that if I didn't show up, the guys were going to have ropes and ladders. So we tied some knots. I did not use the ladder, but I remember standing there and closing my eyes. And the second my eyes were closed, I was immediately into REM activity. I was a sound asleep for the following 2 weeks. If I closed my eyes for longer than a blink, I was asleep. I was dreaming. And it took probably 3 months before I was actually functioning anywhere close to what would be normal for me. It was a long healing process.
So I think to add another layer to your story, if everybody's not listening and thinking this is already pretty amazing, I kept telling Mike, wait till you talk to her, wait till you talk to her. But on top of it, you were raising funds for kids with physical disabilities. And that was the purpose of your marathon swimming. Tell us about that.
That's right. So I started out, almost every swim I did was to raise money for something. The first swim was just to challenge myself. My mother and 2 other nurses had started an organization in Kingston called Hospice Kingston. So for a number of years, I raised money for Hospice Kingston. I think I raised about $50,000 for them. And then when I started doing some more swims, I was invited by Variety Village to raise money for them. So that was the Great Lakes Summer. We raised $548,000 that summer for Variety Village, another $200,000 the following summer during the Butterfly Summer. And then when I was in Kingston and getting ready for the 80-kilometer Butterfly, the reason I had started that was because we needed a new pool in Kingston so that the Y had a pool where I could run the Y Penguins, and they had a place where they could truly train. And so we put my goal at $200,000. We ended up raising, I think, $260,000, but we put the goal at $200,000, which brought my fundraising total to over $1 million for programs for kids with physical impairments.
Unbelievable. I mean, I don't know if
and
I
if
said
you
this on
ask
there.
me which I'm more proud of.
Yeah. Which?
It's the making a positive impact on people's lives, raising that money, knowing that other people have taken something from it is far more important than having swum across the lake. It's the whole message and the opportunity to let people know that there's more to life than doing something for ourselves. To give something to somebody else is far more important.
We have somebody asking a question here. Have you ever had doubts about your abilities, and how did you deal with them?
Absolutely. I think we all have doubts. And I think that we dwell in our doubts sometimes. And I know even to this day, I'll question myself and really feel that maybe I've screwed up something and tear myself apart about it. And I think that that's part of being human, but we have to be able to stop ourselves at some point. We have to just say, okay, that's enough. And then figure out a positive aspect to it. You know, before we went live today, we were talking about the pandemic that we're experiencing right now, and there's all sorts of negative things that we're experiencing from this. But there's also a lot of positive things that are happening, and I think that once we've hit the bottom, then we have to turn it around, start seeing what's positive in our world, and start working with the positives. And I think that that's the most important thing: is find something positive and move towards it, and then just stop those negative thoughts. It's those we can dwell in them and stay there, or we can grow from them and move on. We have a choice.
The power of choice, right? It's one of the greatest phenomena that you from one second to the next could always decide to do something else, and you have that choice. How do you? I mean, I see a lot of willpower, like just gut check. How do you tap into that? How does a regular person who's been procrastinating just say, you know what, I'm gonna do it? What would be the first thing you would tell someone who's struggling with that?
I think that you start with the putting something on the wall. My map on the wall, I think you put something up there that signifies what your goal, what your dream is. And then you have to break your goal into smaller and smaller steps, because it's not easy to say, well, I'm going to swim a lake, so I'm going to get in the lake and swim it, right? There's so many other things. I always think about it as sort of like dishes on Thanksgiving and your dishwasher is broken. So you can walk into the kitchen, you can see the piles everywhere. You can hide the dishes, but that's not going to get the job done. You can stack them really nice and neat so they don't look as horrible, but the job's not getting done. You can put them in the sink and no one can see them, but the job's not getting done. But if you turn on the tap, if you get the water running and one dish washed, then all of a sudden a process is started. The dishes get washed, they get dried, they get put away. You have people come in to help you. You're not doing it by yourself. And slowly that job gets done. So I think it's really important that you have a small enough step for the first step, just turning on the tap, so that the next step can happen. I remember in Lake Huron, I was about 3 or 4 miles from shore, and I was swimming freestyle, and all of a sudden my arms just stopped moving. And I thought, crap, what do I do? And I turned and I looked at my right arm. I said, right arm, all you have to do is go around once. And it went around once. I said, left arm, all you have to do is go around once. And I spoke to my arms for 2 hours. Right arm, go. Left arm, go. But one stroke at a time, I was able to get close enough to shore that the pain in my shoulders disappeared. The pain truly wasn't here. The pain was here. And I was able to get myself through that that stage so that I could start continuing. And I started to swim faster, stronger. The last half mile, I swam butterfly just to prove I had something left.
Wow. That's really interesting. I think that breaking things down into small increments. I remember my first tournament playing for Canada in soccer. And I remember going out there and playing and thinking there is no way anybody can last 2 hours, an hour and a half, 90 minutes playing at this level. Like it's impossible. And I know what I had to do is I broke the game down into 5-minute intervals. So I remember looking at the clock and saying, okay, all you have to think about right now is 5 minutes. You don't have to think about 90 minutes. It's that 5 minutes. And slowly, you're right. It was training my brain to know that I could play 90 minutes, but it took me training my brain in small increments so that I could see that I finished 90 minutes, even though it was in small increments. And then as years went on, I was playing 90-minute games and wasn't even thinking about it. But I think what I love about this conversation is the power of mind. The power of mind is incredible. And if there's anyone that I feel has demonstrated that of a lot of people that I've talked to and met, I think you've demonstrated that more than anyone.
By far.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Do you feel like that's something that is where your strength lies?
Absolutely. I think that when people used to ask me, is it a physical feat or is it a mental feat? And my answer was always yes. Because it's is it 50-50? What is it? It is. It's 100% physical and 100% mental. And I think that anything we do, if it matters that much to us, it has to be that way. We can't kind of maybe sort of head towards it. It's if I'm doing this, I'm going full force into this, and I'm not going to let anything get in my way. And that sometimes is not taken well by people on the outside. They don't understand it, and they think, I've been perceived as rude on occasion, and I know that I probably was rude without intent. But I had to move forward. I had to take that next step. I had to keep going, because if you're not moving forward, you're stuck in the mud. And I refuse to be there.
Amazing. Mike, did I tell you? Was I right?
This is, I'm listening. I'm trying to process everything. I'm trying to put myself in your situation. I'm trying to, I love to prove a naysayer wrong almost more than anybody, maybe not more than you. And I could just thinking about how addictive it might have been to be able to set all these goals. Was it addictive to be doing it? Was it just that have nothing to do with it?
I don't think it's addictive. And people thought that I had a death wish. Like there was all these things, and it was none of it. It was there was a logic behind it. There was a planning behind it. We always had our safety measures in place. Like there was nothing truly dangerous about it. It's not like I was jumping off a cliff, right? And then you look at someone jumping off a cliff and they've done all their math as well. They know what they need to know. It's a lot of training that goes into it to know what you're capable of doing. But I forgot your question already, but maybe I already answered it.
You did. It was just about whether or not it's addictive, where you set all these big goals that people said cannot be broken, cannot be done, and now you've done them. I keep thinking, what's next for you? Like, what other records are you trying to break?
So, I think the addictive thing, it's not the actual action. It's the feeling that you get from achieving something that everybody else believed was impossible. If there was one thing that was addictive, it's that feeling of knowing that everybody thought it was impossible and I just proved that it wasn't. And then the hope that somebody else is taking that knowledge and taking a step beyond. But I don't think there's any other. I was never addicted to the training. I loved the training. It was probably one of the most quiet, peaceful places, being out in the middle of a lake with the sun shining on your back and a pattern of sound as your arm enters the water, the bubbles going past you. Is very meditative. So there was lots to love about the training, and there was times where you're in the water for 12 hours every day. I remember a time, because I told you I'm a procrastinator. I remember a day showing up to the Y, standing on the pool deck talking to the lifeguard for 3 hours and going home having never got in the water. Because I mean, that is part of it also. So I didn't have a coach, so I coached myself, which made it more challenging and easier all at the same time. So what I did was I had a yearly training plan before people really understood that we required a yearly training plan. I had broken it down into months, into weeks, into days. So I knew what my training was for that week. And if I went to the Y one day and didn't get in because it just wasn't that day, I didn't lose anything, because I would be getting back in the water on the Saturday that I had left open free. And that became my training day that I missed in the week. And I think that that's a really healthy way to look at it, is because there are days that maybe we shouldn't be training. And if we can take that day off and fit it in, and if I got sick, I didn't kick myself over it. I didn't try and catch up to everything 2 weeks later. I accepted that I had pushed my body too hard. I got sick, and now I'm going to start again exactly where I need to be, not trying to catch up, because that would just make me more sick. And I think about the athletes right now who have just found out that they won't be going to the Olympics or the Paralympics this year, and they have another whole year, and they can't be in their training environment right now. Some of them, their tendency is going to be to try and catch up afterwards. And it's no, just start where you are. Take this time to get yourself stronger in an area of your weakness, and then step forward and start working.
What I hear a lot of with you, Vicki, too, is, and it's something that I talk a lot with Mike about, is that intuitive feeling. You seem to really trust your guided instincts.
Yeah, I was actually asked a while back, if you were a superhero, what would your superpower be? And it was the power of intuition. I use my intuition when I work with myself. I use my intuition when I'm coaching my athletes. I think it's my greatest strength when I'm coaching, is I'm trying to understand where an athlete is, what they need. And I'm not talking about just the elite level athletes. I'm also talking about my grassroots swimmers, is trying to figure out what they need to be able to take that next step. And I'm not always right. I'm not always there. But I think that as a human being, as a coach, it's something that we need to access more often. We need to be able to look at our young people and put ourselves where they are and see if we can figure out how we can support them in what they need and not what we think they need.
I think your superpower would be swimming. That's what I think your superpower would be. Now, when was the last long swim? When was the last time you did a super long swim?
What's a long swim? My long swim are very different. Last time I did 5 meters.
Yeah, exactly. 25 meters for me. But a challenging swim for you. When was the last time? When was have you hung it up already? Are you still doing super long swims?
I'm obviously not swimming right now because there's no pools. I get in the water and I swim an hour or so most days. In swimming season, I'm in the water longer. I can't say that I've hung up my bathing suit forever, but right now there's more important things in my life, and helping my athletes achieve their goals far outweighs what I might be able to do in a body of water right now. Having said that, I still feel that as an athlete, there's things that I could do, that there's possibilities still in my future, and I'm just not willing to say no at this point. I'm not saying yes, but there's always those possibilities.
I mean, I thank Helen for introducing me to you. I think that I'm almost speechless with the power of the mind. I think it's like 90% mind, 10% anything else. And just to be able to have that willpower to say, I'm going to do it. I'm going to set my mind to something. I'm going to break it down into chunks and actually achieve it. It makes it sound simpler than it is, but it actually is that simple, to just decide you're going to do it and do it.
But it is simple.
Yeah, and I love it. Yeah, so I'm going to get to the dock. I'm going to get from the dock to the raft this year. It's going to happen, life jacket free, and and it was a pleasure meeting you. And I think I'm gonna look back at this interview over and over, and just to capture some of the things that you said, because they were just so powerful in terms of achieving goals. And one of the reasons we created these games was to create an opportunity for people who are not athletes right now, or maybe who have always wanted to be athletes, or are now on the couch and deciding, you know what, this is something I can do. This is something I can train for. I can be a couch potato today and become an athlete tomorrow. And I think this interview was really great to get into the mind of someone who's done it, not being a couch potato, of course, but fought procrastination and set world records.
Yeah, just so we list this, just so everybody knows, I'm going to list some of Vicki's accomplishments as we're wrapping this up. First crossing of all 5 Great Lakes. First double crossing of Lake Ontario. First butterfly swim across the English Channel. Longest solo swim, 94 kilometers. Longest solo swim, 63 hours, 40 minutes. 129 hours, 45 minutes, continuous swimming pool record. Greatest distance butterfly, male or female, 80.2 kilometers. Most crossings of Lake Ontario, 6. Circumnavigation of Sydney Harbor, butterfly. Crossing of the Juan de Fuca Strait in British Columbia, butterfly. Crossing of Lake Ontario, butterfly. Crossing of the Catalina Channel, butterfly. Like, unbelievable. Like, seriously.
Not too bad.
Like, you look at that now and think, holy moly, that's pretty crazy.
Yeah. It seems impossible, doesn't it?
And yet, nothing is
impossible. Here we are.
Nothing is impossible. Yeah, and I think I brought some of her quotes in that I loved. I've got a few things here. You say that nothing is impossible. It's how we look at it and how we decide to handle it that makes us successful. The experts told me it was impossible, and I just decided to not believe what they were saying and just believe in the possibility.
So true.
Yeah. Well, I'm so grateful for you being here with us. I hope that everyone now can see why I am in so much awe of you, Vicki. We had somebody comment on our post here that you were an inspiration to a lot of kids.
Wow.
And I really hope that continues today, because I know you're still involved. I know people that know you and say that you are. I remember when we were in Kingston and we were filming with you, and my friend was just like in awe that we were going to be in your vicinity and had to be there with us. And that's just a testament to who you are beyond an athlete, but as a person. And geez, you should write a book.
I'm planning on that. It's just one thing at a time.
Yeah, one thing at a time. Well, from us at the Golf Games and from this series, Elevate Me, thank you for your wealth of information and knowledge.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for tuning in.